So hi everyone, my name is Stacy New and I'm the HR generalist. Hope you guys are doing well today. Thank you for joining us today for our HR Power Hour. Today we will focus on recognizing unconscious bias in the workplace. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Please submit all your questions in the Q&A section. We'll address those questions at the end of the presentation. Now I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Skronsky.
All right, thank you, Stacy.
You're welcome.
And welcome everyone. I am Sarah Skronsky, the principal consultant at EOS Human Resources Consulting. We work mainly with small businesses who are not quite ready to have HR on staff and are, but still have employees and still need help. And so we're really excited to have everybody here today. This is a charged topic, and I think we're just going to be dealing with a small part of it, but we really appreciate everybody joining us today and participating with our event. And I'm joined by Suzanne Kress. Suzanne, would you like to introduce yourself? You are on mute, Suzanne.
Louis says he would like to be on video too, so that we're all on video.
Okay.
I mean, that's like, he wants a discussion. I think I appreciate that, Louis. Okay. So I'm Suzanne Kress. I am the newest member of the EOS team of HR consultants. I have known Sarah for a very long time now and seen her start her business from the ground up, and we finally got an opportunity to work together thanks to COVID-19. So it does have some benefits to it. I am based here in Denver, Colorado, and have about 15 years of experience in HR and really love the variety of helping out the different clients that we have.
Great, thank you. So today we are talking about unconscious bias, and as I said, this is a really charged topic. This is with everything that's going on right now with the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and some of the other people, many of the other people who have been wrongfully killed. It has brought up a lot of tension and a lot of grief and a lot of awareness around something that has been going on for a long time. And so today, when we were talking about how we wanted to address this bigger topic, we realized we couldn't. There's no way that we could do it. I'm already getting choked up even talking about it. And I think that we probably all would have sat here crying for an hour. But what we wanted to talk about was biases as a starting point, because this is just a little tiny piece of something that becomes much bigger because everybody has biases and so many people deny that they have them. And so we're going to explain what biases are, explicit and implicit. We'll go through 8 different unconscious biases and kind of really define those and give examples of those, especially those type of biases, how those biases will show up in the workplace. We'll also talk about how you can assess yourself and possibly people on your team for biases, and kind of what the next steps are from there. So to start off with, as I said, we all have biases. I'm always very disheartened when I'm having a conversation with a client about somebody who has brought forward some claim of bias or discrimination or harassment, and people say, I don't have any biases. And that's, I mean, if you can't even acknowledge that you have biases, then we really have a long way to go, because everybody has a bias. They're taught to us, and we learn about them as we grow and with the people around us. So a bias is a prejudice in favor or against one thing or another. And that could be a person, it could be a group, but it's favoring one thing over another. It can be negative or positive. Usually the type of biases we're talking about are the negative or the unfair biases. And the ones specifically that we're going to talk about are ones that are directed towards social groups, such as ethnicity, race, age, gender identity, physical abilities, religion, sexual orientation, weight. But we'll also talk about some of the things that we have in here are examples of biases that happen in marketing, in sales, in just in our daily lives that happen. And because they're so ingrained in us, we don't even realize that they're happening. So we've talked about, we said there was conscious bias, which is explicit, and there's unconscious bias, which is implicit. And the conscious bias, these are the ones that we don't really have to talk about because they're so obvious. These are the people that are outwardly racist. These are the people that are outwardly harassing people and doing negative things openly against somebody based on some physical or physical attribute of the person. What's more insidious are the unconscious biases, and these are the implicit biases. These are much more common. We are not always aware of them, and they operate unconsciously, and they often contradict what you express as a conscious value. And that's where so many people will say, I'm not a racist, and so therefore I don't have biases, but that's not the whole picture. And so today we want to really kind of break down what some of these unconscious biases are and how you can look at yourself, mostly because it really starts with working on yourself, and how you can work with your team if you're a manager on how to acknowledge and recognize these biases and start to break them down so that they're not a wall between employees and between people. So the 8 biases we're going to talk about, and again, these are the 8 most common or most talked about, but these are by all means not all of them. But they cover a lot of ground. So we have the halo and horns effect, confirmation bias, attribution bias, gender bias, anchoring bias, conformity bias, and name bias. And some of those are, you can probably tell by the names where we're going to go with those, but we're going to break it down individually and give you some examples. So Suzanne, why don't you start us off with the halo and the horns?
Sorry. Sorry about that. So yes, I want to just say thank you to everyone who is on the call today. This is the best thing that we could think of to help in this case. Perhaps we're not going out and protesting, perhaps we're not writing letters to our Congress people, but this is what we thought we could do to help in our little world of HR. So the halo and horns effect. So both are, and again, these are unconscious biases, so you don't know you have them. And they both focus on one trait, good halo, bad horns, to overshadow any other traits. So an example at work would be, of the halo example would be like a manager favors an employee that shares a similar passion or hobby. You know, maybe they like to talk about the Broncos every Monday, and all of a sudden, because that person likes the Broncos, now the manager likes them more and thinks they're a great person.
Watch out, Suzanne, you're talking to a bunch of Californians here.
Well, that's why it's a good example, because that would never happen in California. And also on the other side of that, maybe a manager feels like the employee just is kind of sloppy and doesn't comb his hair, and then all of a sudden he automatically assumes that that employee is not performing well. And so you want to avoid having one trait dictate the whole characteristic pool of one person. And so what you would want to do here is just take a step back. And I know we judge people, but make sure you're judging them on their merits, not just their one characteristic. It's a person and they're complex. And I think learning about that is most important, rather than jumping to a conclusion that leads you to make a decision that later you will regret maybe.
Right, and it's so easy, and I think a lot of the examples, or a lot of the kind of the cleaning up of this that we'll talk about, happens in the recruiting process specifically, because that's the point where we're bringing people in. And with the halo and horns example, if you start having a conversation with somebody during an interview about how much they love the Broncos, or how much they don't love the Broncos, or whichever that is, then you're not getting at what can they do the work. Can they, are they going to be a great person to have around? Sure, but when we need to get the work done, then we need to make sure we have people around us who have the skills and who have the ability to actually do the work that we're interviewing for. And so a lot of this will go back to creating very structured ways of interviewing people, so that you're comparing apples to apples, and you're not comparing, oh, this person was jovial and great, and we had a great conversation about football or golf, or whatever political views, which would be horrifying to have in an interview, but whatever those are, you want to make sure that you're taking that out of the equation, so that you're really looking at what the skills are for the person. Anything else you want to add there, Sue?
Yeah, an example that happened to me is if I'm interviewing someone, they say they're from New Jersey, although I didn't ask them where they were from, then I get very excited. I'm like, oh good, I'm from New Jersey too. So you must be as cool as I am. And so I've done it too. And all of a sudden I'm not objective anymore. So it's one that I think is a good first step to seeing if you're doing or not.
Yeah, it's very, and again, these are all very easy to fall into. So if you're doing it, don't beat yourself up over it, but just make sure that you're acknowledging it.
Mm-hmm.
So the next one is the confirmation bias. And this is the tendency to look for things that either confirm or deny one of our pre-existing beliefs. And so this is, politics is the prime example of this, because when you have somebody that you like or dislike, you will only see things that confirm that belief. So as somebody who really looked up to our former president, Obama, I constantly am comparing people against him and what he did. And our current president, I'm not as fond of. And so anything I see about him tends to exaggerate that negative. And so this one is much more personal, because you're really coming up against your own personal views and your own personal beliefs. And that's a hard one. You can have two people that are very, very educated and eloquent and can speak, but when they're digging their heels in, they can become very obstinate about their views and are not willing to see the other person's point of view. And so it's really important to be able to to encourage that debate, and when somebody is speaking about something that you disagree with, rather than getting your hackles up and rather than holding on to that ball and chain, as shown in the image of holding you onto that, listening to what their point of view is, making sure that you are asking questions that help you to understand and to grow your knowledge. And maybe it doesn't change your mind, but maybe it just makes you understand. Maybe eventually it'll help you to understand even more why you believe a certain way. But you need to expand that vision so that you can kind of see both sides of it and make sure that you're weighing things balanced.
Yeah, Sarah, I think one way I've seen this in the workplace is when your boss has this amazing new idea and so they ask you to do research and focus teams, but you know your boss is excited about it already. So
Mm-hmm.
you know what kinds of questions to write to ask people to confirm that yes, this is a great idea.
Right.
So it seems like you're using data, but it's actually just a way to make the boss feel better about this great idea he has.
Right. Because any data can be skewed to what you want it to be. You know, you can find a report out there that was written by anybody that will say what you want what you want the end result to be. And so yeah, you're spot on that it needs to be something that's truly balanced. Or you know, in the case of if the boss is going to go with that idea, if you want to go with an idea and you want to get all the data to back it up, then you can definitely do that. But know that there might be another point of view out there that can show just as much the opposite idea as well.
Yeah, and you know, one way we can, well, there's a few ways we can avoid this type of unconscious bias, and that's to encourage debate. You know, this is a difficult time to speak about politics. However, by speaking about it, either side, both sides, whomever, you can start learning and forming your opinion. And perhaps there's something that you believe to be true and you are staunch about it. And then you have a conversation with someone and then you start thinking, hey,
Mm-hmm.
this might be a different way to look at things. I didn't think of it that way.
Right.
And then for in hiring people, you would want to, again, just ask very standard questions. That's why we always recommend that you have a set of questions that you ask every candidate, because that way you can't go off on just confirming that, okay, this person is, you know, I'm confirming that, yes, I'm asking you questions because I really want to hire you, if that makes sense.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's and this could also be along the lines of this person went to a, you know, everybody that goes to a certain school is smart. Everybody that
Mm-hmm.
goes to Harvard is smart. Therefore, I'm going to hire somebody who went to Harvard, even though they flunked out, but hey, they went to Harvard. So therefore they must be the smartest person in the staff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another confirmation bias that you want, those type of things that you want to be aware of. And just to kind of touch on something you said, towards the end of the presentation, we'll talk more specifically about having those harder conversations
Okay.
when you are noticing the bias, and some tools that we can use to have those conversations. So, all right, attribution bias.
So this is also called a self-serving bias. So this is when something awesome happens and you're like, yes, I did it. And then something awesome happens to someone you know, and you're like, oh, they're lucky. Like you don't actually think, wow, they did a good job. Or the opposite. Something bad happens to you. It's not your fault. It's somebody else's or something else's. And if something bad happens to someone you know, it's got to be their fault. It can't be someone else. There can't be anybody else to blame. And I think this is a different kind of bias. I have not had a lot of opportunity to think this through and see if I'm doing it, but I think that we'll be able to give you some examples of ways that you can test now. And again, this is just, I say this because I just didn't know I was doing it, and now I do.
Yeah, and this is one, especially when you're looking at people working together, that in if somebody feels like, oh, I never get the promotion, or I never get a raise, or I never get, and it's not my fault that I don't get the raise. I do everything fine, and it's not my fault, and you know, and believe me, we deal with a lot of these people that feel like it's never their fault when we have to sit down and have the conversation of that, I'm sorry, but you're getting terminated or disciplined or whatever the case is, because you're not meeting those expectations. And again, this goes back to having, you know, strong job descriptions, strong checklists and set, skill lists of what you need people to be doing and what metrics you need people to be performing to. Because, if they're going to have this type of bias, nothing's ever going to be their fault. Every time they're late, it's never going to be their fault. Every time they don't get that project done on time, it's never going to be their fault. And so you want to make sure that you're addressing this by having those strong metrics in place, so that you can say, this is what you were supposed to do and you did not do this, and make sure that that's clear to them.
Yeah, I saw this very early on in my career. It used to be that when somebody applied for a job, they needed to have a cover letter. Even before my time, they had to have it nice and it's on paper and it's sent in. Well, if I were to think the same way I did back then, which is nobody is qualified unless they have a cover letter, or none of these candidates are qualified if they have a misspelling or a wrong grammar or spelling, I wouldn't be able to hire anyone right now. It would be impossible. And just because it's good to have standards, but those change over time. And just because someone has submitted their resume online, maybe with their phone by clicking just once to apply to your job, it's probably a good idea to take a look at the resume and give them a shot.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, another way I've heard this, I just want to have the one other thing I forgot, because it says that a candidate is late for an interview. I've also seen people do that. They'll say, we'll go through the motions, we talk to the candidate, we sit around, they're like, the candidate was late, so let's move on. We're not going to hire them. And they've just interviewed this person. And I think I might have done that before, but you don't know what happened to them. You don't know if they really tried their best and got stuck in the elevator, or maybe, it's not just that they were late on purpose. Things happen to every one of us. And sometimes bad things happen and it's not our fault. So I think that's a bias that we can watch ourselves, to not freak out if a candidate is late, or rather, if a candidate is late, do not disqualify them automatically.
Right. Well, and to that extent, anybody who is late, and kind of going back to why we chose this theme today is, anytime something happens bad, or something seems to be happening bad to somebody, you also want to make sure that you're giving them the grace to explain and to correct. Earlier I said, if somebody's always saying it's not their fault, that's one thing. But if somebody is dealing with things that, maybe they have to take a bus to work, and so they're at the mercy of the bus lines, or maybe they are in an area that has poor internet connection, so they can't always make it to online meetings, or some of these things that might have more to do with socioeconomic things. We want to make sure that we're creating some grace around that as well, so that we can continue to lift people up when it's truly not their fault. When they're in a situation and they need our help, we need to be able to say, okay, this is outside of your control. What can we as employers and managers do to help you succeed? And creating that space to be empathetic to that. All right, the next one is gender bias. This one is I feel like this one is probably one of the more prevalent ones, because it does get talked about a lot. There's still a bias in terms of pay gaps between men and women, and then you add things like the different ethnicities and different races between men, and then men and women, that gap gets even wider. It's in terms of business decisions. It goes back to what the skills are, what the duties are, what they're supposed to be producing. And if person A is producing the same amount as person B, then they should be paid the same amount. There shouldn't be any gap, regardless of what their genders are. And that goes the same with ethnicity, is of making sure that when you're looking at this type of salary gap or gender or salary biases or gender biases or race biases, that you have to take those things that are this is one of the more concrete biases that you can have, along with race and ethnicity. It's like, this is, if somebody is calling you sweetie, if a man is calling me sweetie, it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, you know, and it's like, we're not in the 1950s anymore. And I worked really hard not to put up images that they were showing that because it's just not where we should be right now. And we really need to be taking a good look at making sure that women are treated as fairly as you would a man. But it still can be very, very subtle, because I think women in some ways tend to, I know, being, you know, the age I am, that I'm right on that cusp where things really are shifting. And there are still things that men say to me that somebody else will say, well, didn't that upset you? And I've just let it go over my head, because it's that gender bias that I just grew up with, and I didn't even acknowledge that it was a bias. I just thought that's how women were treated. I just thought that's how that person treated me, or however it was, and I accepted it. And I think one of the things we really want people to acknowledge is that we don't have to accept these things. We need to address them so that we can move forward.
Yeah, I've seen this in the workplace when I've had a person that wanted to hire someone who could do heavy lifting. And so they literally said to me, I need a big guy in here. I need a strong man. They literally said that. And I just laughed at them, and I'm like, it doesn't matter if they're a man or a woman. And they're like, what? You know, and it could be as simple as that, or, you know, it happens like this. You know, you're in the hospital, here comes the doctor, you talk to him, and then here comes a nurse, and it's a he.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, how come you're not a doctor? You're a nurse. Just like that, it'll happen. And you don't even know you're doing it. So don't put yourself up on a pedestal and say, oh my gosh, I am equal. I treat all men and women equally. You don't know that for sure. And if you think you're paying your males and females the same, fine. Why don't you prove it? Go look at the data, double check, and feel better about it. Because if you don't ever check, and it's not that hard to check, then you'll miss out on an opportunity to level the playing field and eventually be able to hire quality people who know that you're a fair employer.
Right. Anchoring bias.
Anchoring bias. So think of this as the anchor. It's just, there's like one first thing that you find, or something that was in the past that you find, and that one thing makes all your decisions for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can give a good example of this, but it's funny how, yes, you can be quick to judge. We've talked about that before, but again, you have to check yourself to say, oh, well, they said that they were from Hawaii. And then you're talking to them, and you already want to be their friend because they are from Hawaii, and that Hawaii is awesome. And the people are so laid back. And it's just a bias that you might be right, but you might be wrong. Right.
Yeah, and with anchoring bias is one that I talked about earlier, that it's used a lot in sales and in marketing. This is when you get the screenshot that says, you know, that you can get this primo service for $5,000, or you can get this service for $500. don't you, and automatically you're like, well, I'm going to get the $500 one because it's so much cheaper than the $5,000 one. But if you were to actually look on another site, you'd find out that that same service was $100. So it's that, but you have an anchor of, oh, this is worth 5,000 and I'm getting it for 500, and therefore it's great. And you know, and so that's how marketing uses it. But when we're dealing with people, you know, you have an anchor of, well, when I was in high school, I was harassed or bullied by, you know, a guy with a big nose, and so now every guy with a big nose is a bully, and it doesn't matter. The first thing I think of was that guy is a bully. And so it's those type of attributes that we're creating an anchor in our mind. And so now when you have somebody that comes in, and by the way, I was not bullied by somebody that has a big nose, but but you know, if you have somebody that comes into your office and you're interviewing them and they have a big nose, all of a sudden you're back at that anchor point where you're feeling like this person is not safe. I don't want them here. And that has nothing to do with what's going on right there and right now. So it's really important to really just be able to justify why you're making these decisions, why you're thinking these things, because they have nothing to do with what's happening right now. We all know that there are good people and there are some not so good people in the world, and we should not let people who are not good in a moment, for whatever reason, we should not allow those instances to now anchor us to a belief that anybody that looks or talks or walks or anything like that person is exactly like that person and is going to do the same thing.
Yeah, and sometimes a good way to combat this bias and some of the others that we were talking about is just ask someone to play devil's advocate. It's a great way to check yourself to make sure that you're not anchoring something, and it helps you look at things in a different way. You can look at things more critically, you've done your due diligence, and then you make your decision. And I think that you'll find it more helpful to be able to talk to other people and be open-minded so that you don't close off to just one thing about one person.
Right. Groupthink. Me? This is me. So groupthink is peer pressure. This is your desire to fit in. And this happens so often, and especially because we've got a kind of a herd mentality. We've got we want to fit in, we want to be liked. We don't want to stand up and say something's wrong or we disagree with something. And so when you can take it from a simple thing of you're with a group and everybody is going to go out to lunch and everybody else wants pizza and you really don't want pizza, but you go in and you have pizza, and that's the simplest version. The more harmful version is when somebody says that they don't like somebody, they don't want to hire somebody, they want to fire somebody because of a reason that has nothing to do with their work or has any real standing, and everybody goes along with it because nobody wants to speak up against that person. Nobody wants, maybe that person is an executive, maybe that person is a bully, maybe that person is just talkative and loud and kind of overtakes all the conversations. But it's important for people to be able to have the space to have their own decisions, to have their own thoughts, and to bring those forward in a safe way to the entire team.
Yeah, I've seen this happen. Again, we're talking about hiring people. You have a group interview and the interviewee leaves and you immediately start talking about them. And I've worked for places where there's usually one outspoken person who's going to answer first. And sometimes that's also a person that's kind of in a position of leadership. And so once that person says, oh my gosh, I love them, they're fantastic, you would be hard pressed to say no to that person. And you don't want to tell them no. You want to be the same. And everyone else thinks this. It's the majority. The majority rules, right? No, it does not. The majority is not always right. We're seeing that in the United States of America right now. Just because you're in a majority situation doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. So what I've done, with hiring teams is group interviewee leaves, have the folks, while you're taking them out, write things down. Don't talk yet. Write down their ideas and then come together and talk. And it will be much easier for them to talk about what they wrote down than feel like they just have to say what everybody else said. And that works pretty well.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a lot of it has to do with giving people the space and making sure that they know they can speak up, and that it's okay. And in the hiring situation, there are so many times where people haven't spoken up, and then a hire doesn't work out, and all of a sudden you start hearing well, I never liked that. I never, I didn't want that person to get hired. I didn't think that they were qualified. And everybody is looking around going, why didn't you say something? Yeah. So yep. you definitely want to make sure that people feel comfortable saying things in a group, because they may see something that you're not seeing because of another bias you have. Yes. So it's really important to let go of that peer pressure and let go of that group thing, so that people can speak their truth about what's going on.
Our last bias of the day, the 8th bias, is a name bias. This is pretty self-explanatory, but for me, I'm just going to start right with the examples. So you get a resume and you read the person's name. It's usually the first thing on the paper or in the email. And just by reading that name, some unconscious bias in you may be triggered. And they've studied this, and they've showed that if you read that name on the resume and it sounds like an African-American name, you are less likely to be called back than a name that sounds more white. It happens. And same thing, Asian last names, you'll see them right now in the United States. We have to be conscious of these biases against Asian folks, because same thing, we see their name on a resume, and when we see a white person's name, we're more likely to call the white person first. And so you can see too, this would be true for anyone. I've received resumes where I can't even pronounce the name. And even just for that reason, I'm like, I'm not gonna call them because I don't know how to pronounce their name. Let me just call John Smith. And so you don't even know you're doing it. Like I said, but this is an easy fix, right, Sarah?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And this one, I think I have been, I've consciously worked at this, and rather than seeing it as a fear and I don't know how to say that name. I'm going to say it wrong. These people know that their names might be difficult for us Anglo-Saxon people who just don't know how to speak any other language of their own. But if you, like with anything, if you are gracious about it and you're humble about it, and you say, can you tell me how to say your name? I want to say your name right. I want to respect you. Can you help me say your name correctly? They will more than likely, 99% of the time, unless they're so resigned to the fact and have already given themselves a shorter name, but they will more than likely help you say that name and help you and will appreciate that you are trying to do that. And then that takes that away, and then it's just about the work that they're doing. And because you can have the best people, the best workers, and you're counting them out because you didn't want to say their name, or you thought their name meant something else. And honestly, I'm it's nice to see more and more people with African sounding names or more urban sounding names that are in these higher positions that are now being interviewed on TV and that are now being recognized and starting little tiny steps of starting to take that stigma away. But we really just have to know that a name is a name, and you know, people can really call themselves anything, but that doesn't mean that that is who they are. And you need to find out who they are, and you need to respect their name for what it is.
I also see this tying to gender bias. So I have tried giving the hiring managers resumes that do not have a name on them. I feel that they are much more objective. And I've seen this in positions that are traditionally male traditions. I'll give them resumes and none of the women are picked. It's not that I'm going to blame them. They have an unconscious bias that is happening that they don't know. And they may really not realize, like, of course, no, I would never do that. Well, right. It's like, I'll show you again. And so, especially if you feel like that might be going on with someone that you work with, try that. And they might be like, how come these don't have any names? Be like, oh, they wanted to be anonymous.
Well, and they've done a lot of studies around this, that they have put two resumes down, all identical resumes down in front of people, and one has an ethnic sounding name, what you know, African American or Chinese or Indian, whatever type of ethnicity, or even female, and one has John Smith on it, and they are exactly the same, and John Smith gets called in for no other reason than John Smith is their name. So it's very important, and you know, when you're recognizing these biases, it's important to find ways to trick yourself out of being biased, and that's until you become more to a point where you acknowledge them. And I usually read resumes from the bottom up, because one, there's usually a timeline, so I want to see kind of where they started. But two, the name is at the top, so I don't want to look at the name. And so I've had to do things for myself to trick myself out of that, because I'll be looking at so many resumes. So it's important to find ways that you can help yourself get over some of these biases. So now that we've talked about some of the more common biases, we all know that these are happening to people. We've talked about it. They're happening to people every day, and in workplaces, in social aspects, in the grocery store. It's happening every day. So what do you do if you're a victim of a bias? And it's important to know that if you feel that you've been a victim of it, you need to evaluate, is this a one-time thing, or is this an ongoing thing? Is this somebody that you're going to have to deal with forever? Is it going to impact how you're working with people, or is it something that you just need to kind of brush it off and move on? And that's completely up to the victim. There are some, like I said, I can be a victim of a lot of sexual and gender biases, and I just brush them off because I need to move forward. And a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, I probably won't see that person again. And do I want to stop my forward motion to educate that person? But if I do decide to stop that, then I need to know what my goal is. Do I want them to apologize for it? Do I want them to be punished for it? Do I want them to stop their behavior? Do I want to be their teacher? What is my goal? And it's important to know that, because if I just want them to apologize so I can move on, then that's fine. But if I want them to acknowledge this, and I want to get kind of, if I'm really upset about this, and I need them to know that they can't, not only can they not do this to me, they should not be doing this to anybody else, then I'll address that in a different way. I'll approach it in a different way. But whatever that way is, I need to make sure that they understand exactly what happened and how it made me feel. So you know, calling somebody a bully, if I had gone back to that guy with the big nose and I had said you're a bully, that's not going to help him. That would never have helped him. If I said, when you said this, when you called me this name, when you did this action, when you tripped me, when you, whatever it was, and I'm talking childhood things, so hopefully nobody's tripping people in a workplace, but when you're doing these, when you did this specific thing, it made me feel bad. It made me feel like you didn't respect me. It made me feel like you didn't trust me. It made me, whatever that feeling was. And so a lot of times this is not something that we can turn around and in the moment respond to. And so it's important to, you know, give ourselves a breath and make all of these decisions internally before we vent it out. Because when we vent it out without checking ourselves, that's where the huge clash comes from. And it's not to say that where people are right now and the fact that there are protests going on and there are things happening, it's not that they don't have a right to say that, partly because they've been saying that for so long. They have been saying this. And when you keep saying the same thing over and over and you're not getting any response, you start to get louder. And so that is what's happening. But it's important to be able to take that step back and have a conversation with the other person when it's a one-on-one situation where you can say, I need you to stop and I need you to hear me. And this is going to be uncomfortable for both of us. Neither one of us want to have this conversation because I feel bad and I'm about to make you feel bad. And this is not going to be comfortable. But we need to move forward. We need to have that conversation. So those are some things when you're the victim of biases to think about when you're getting ready to make that bold statement. Because this is a scary thing. This is you're stepping out of that group think. You're stepping out of that conformity of this is just what I'm going to do. And being able to say, this is not okay is not always responded to and reciprocated and appreciated. And so we really need to pull up all of our courage and calm ourselves down so that we can invite a dialogue with people and we can ask that they hear us and understand why what they did is so hurtful.
Yes, and I'm going to talk about what happens when you're accused of bias, and I'll try to go through this quickly so that we do have time for any questions at the end. I can think of a few times that I was accused of bias. The people that I would like to accuse of bias right now don't do any of these things. So if you would do these things, that would be great. So if someone accuses you of being biased, just first think about what the heck they're talking about. You know, what is it? What is it that you said? What is it that you did? And then remember that you might have said something and it's not, you don't believe it. You just said it. And that's the broader context of those unconscious biases coming out. And you gotta stay calm. You have to say you're sorry, because if somebody's gonna tell you that, then they're offended by something you did or said. And you're lucky if somebody comes to you and tells you, because you get a chance to be a better person in the long run. So listen to them. There's no need to be defensive and be like, well, no, I didn't mean that. I can't believe it. Why would you think that? Be like, wow, okay. I apologize if I made you feel uncomfortable. And just take it as a positive opportunity to change. I can think of lots of little things that we say in the United States that are just these kind of random words that you don't know or is offending someone, and it is. And somebody might call you out on it one day, and just listen to what they have to say.
And so since a lot of the people on the call today are managers and are supervisors, how can we avoid these bias-based behaviors? And one of the first things to do is to encourage mentoring and coaching, making sure that you are looking at people who are not like you, who are not like, if you look around your office and you see, the majority of people look like you, that's where you are realizing that there's some biases in your hiring and in your decision making. And so looking to people who are not like you and sponsoring them and helping to coach and mentor them and bring them up through the company.
I think that, oh, sorry. I think another way that you can avoid bias at work, especially, is, helping someone actually do something they're really good at. And maybe you're not good at it, but you want to recognize that that person is. And so you give them something, and they are appreciative that you're giving them that opportunity.
You also want to look at who might, again, looking at your room when everybody looks the same and you have somebody who might be an outsider, making sure that person is included, making sure that you are working to address any type of disconnect with that person, so that you can, not only they can be part of the group, but you can learn from them and learn from their experiences.
When you're interviewing candidates, before you start interviewing them, do two things. One would be some kind of phone interview screen, and then some kind of in-person or Zoom meeting screen, and stick to your notes. If you ask the same questions of every person you're looking to hire, it will be much easier to compare them than if you had one conversation with one person, about the Denver Broncos, and another conversation with this person that, has nothing in common with you. So just try to use those standardizations.
Mm-hmm. Setting reasonable parameters around the amount of help you offer to special connections. So, again, going back to that person who is a Broncos fan, you don't want to be offering them more help than you would somebody who you don't have that same affinity with. So making sure that any type of help that's being offered is being offered systematically and evenly to all of your staff.
Attend professional affinity group meetings and inclusiveness events. They've been having, especially for us HR folks, I'm not sure about the rest of the world, but a lot of virtual conferences right now, and it's amazing because it's free. They want to take this opportunity to teach people about things, and on one of those, it was a course about being more inclusive of people with disabilities. And in that meeting, I saw the panelists. One was blind, one was deaf, one was working for a nonprofit, and one person was corporate. And so, the one corporate person was in a wheelchair. So I've never really actually thought about that before. I've never thought about, this person who said, we don't like to go out in COVID because I need to read your lips. I am deaf, but your lips are covered by a mask. And so it's really, really hard. And I really wouldn't have thought of that, I don't think.
Right.
It was really interesting.
Yeah. And I think, the next one is evaluate your actions daily. And I think that it's important to look at what we're doing and to not be afraid to ask questions. I think, I fight against the fact that I hear my mom's voice in my head, who I love my mom dearly, but she was also like, don't be rude, don't stare, don't ask questions. And how are we going to learn about that other person if we're not asking questions and we're not, not rude questions, but just asking, is there anything that we can do to support you? Is there anything that we need to know? and evaluate that on a daily basis. And you know, this has been, I feel like even in this past 3 months as we come through this, everything we've come through, I have to evaluate myself every single day because there's something new, there's some new challenge, there's some new story out there that I have to stop and think, oh, why was my reaction X to that versus anything else? And so you really need to look at that on a daily basis.
Yep, and then make sure you're asking for feedback. You always have an opportunity to better yourself. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if you are biased right now or not, but you have a shot to not only, like we're trying to do, change some things with you guys, but you have a shot to hear that feedback and make a change so that your behavior changes. And, you know, we're getting closer to self-actualization.
Step by step, yeah. All right. So the last bit of information as we start to wrap up here is Harvard has an implicit association test, and this is they have a test based on race biases, but they also have tests based on health biases. If you know people that you know, you can see if you have biases against people that don't eat healthy or who are heavier or have different features than you, and they have a whole list of different things that you can take these tests on. And while they're not, obviously it's not a be all end all test, it is an interesting thing of oh, I didn't recognize that in myself. And again, this is all about starting with self-actualization, starting with the, you know, we have to look at ourselves and what our biases are so that we can start to acknowledge that we all have them and start to change that and change how we're dealing with things. So. And finally, I just did want to acknowledge that today is Juneteenth, and I am, for those who have been on this, have seen us talk before, you'll notice that Alicia Moody is not joining us today because she is celebrating with her family. And so for those who are celebrating this, I do want to acknowledge this, and that we do need to celebrate for what we have accomplished and acknowledge that we still have a very long way to go, and hopefully we can move forward together.
I know a lot of you are in the Bay Area, so you might know what Juneteenth is, but if you don't know what Juneteenth is or means, go find out.
Good to know. And then finally, we do offer harassment and diversity training, or I should learn that, harassment and discrimination prevention training, which includes diversity. We do not train you on
sexual harassment training. No.
No. But we do offer that. It is via a live webinar. And for those who are participating in this is something in California that is required of all employers with 5 or more employees. Employees need to have a 1-hour training every 2 years, and supervisors need to have a 2-hour training, which teaches you not only how to spot it and how to address it, but how to deal with it when there is a claim. So we offer this training, and we are offering a 25% discount through the end of June. If you sign up, you can go to go.eoshr.com/safe-workplace. And finally, I'm sorry, I keep saying last one. The next episode of Remote Strong will be next Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Remote Strong is the webinar series that I do with the Freedom Makers, Laura Renner, and we talk about how to manage your remote teams. And next week we'll be focusing on creating workflows. So don't miss that.
Yeah, if you haven't seen one of those, give it a chance. What I found fascinating was that if you learn about Laura Renner and the Freedom Makers, they have been virtual this whole time. This is not new news to them. No. So they have so many insights about how to best work with a remote team and how to best work as a team that way. So it's pretty interesting.
Yep. All right, and with that, we'll open it up to questions. I know we're already after 4 o'clock. I'm so sorry we ran over. There was a lot of information. But does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
There's currently no questions in the Q&A.
All right. Well,
That's okay.
we will stick around for a minute or so if you want to ask a question. We appreciate everybody joining us. You can also reach out to us via email at hr@eshr.com. If you have any follow-up questions or thoughts, we would appreciate that. There is a if you have any ideas of things that you'd like us to talk about in the future, any topics you'd like to hear, we also encourage you to submit that via email as well. We would appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's not that it's bad if people don't have questions, but I hope every one of you realizes we've given you at least one action item you can go
Yep.
to right now to help fight unconscious bias. So go for it.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Thank you.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy Juneteenth.